by Professor Anthony Costello, former director of at the World Health Organization, now a professor of global health at University College London, also a member of Independent Sage. Thank you very much for being with us this morning. Good to see you. This target, then, we're on track and it's very welcome.
Yeah, it's excellent news. 15 million. We're on track to cover the highly vulnerable in due course. It's a fantastic tribute to the primary care networks and GPs and all their teams around the country. I had my vaccine about 10 days ago, and I was very impressed at how slick it all was. And, you know, it looks likely we've got 20% of the population vaccinated now. Hopefully we'll double that in the next 4 to 6 weeks. But we have to be careful because although cases are falling back and positivity rates are going down, there's still a long way to go, even though it's great to see that in all 4 nations and in all age groups it's come down. Hospitalizations are falling steeply, but we've still got more people in hospital than in the peak a year ago, and many more people in intensive care units than a year ago. Deaths have certainly peaked, but we're still running at, more than 700 deaths a day, which is, 2747 crashes. So it's a huge number. But the vaccination rollout has been most impressive. After Israel, we're doing better than any other country in the world.
You talk about being cautious, and it would appear that the Prime Minister certainly is being cautious. He's going to announce plans for easing the lockdown on February the 22nd. How do you feel about schools going back on March the 8th? Is that the right thing to do? And should all children go back at the same time, or do we need a more staggered approach?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I mean, obviously, everyone wants to get children back to school. And ideally, we don't want to have any more lockdowns. The problem is, I think, that the government policy is to vaccinate everyone as quickly as possible. And then, as Dr. Jonathan Van Dam said, they want to let the virus spread like seasonal flu. Now, that sounds like a rosy scenario, and that would mean getting children back to school, and we would see an increase in the number of cases in children and young people until such time as young people are vaccinated, which could be many months. But, even if we get up to 40 million vaccinated, we would still have nearly 30 million people unvaccinated. And that raises all kinds of uncertainties. So we would have virus mutations at risk. We already have the South Africa virus, which we know has some resistance to the AstraZeneca vaccine, both in the laboratory and also escape for mild to moderate cases. We don't know the effects on serious disease yet. The other question is, will we reach herd or population immunity? At what level will that be? The more transmissible the virus, the higher the coverage that you need. And then this idea that it's just seasonal flu is disputed by many. I mean, this is COVID. And there is, probably 200,000 to 300,000 people with long COVID, including children. And, of course, there has been an upsurge in admissions of children to hospital, presumably due to COVID and some of the nastier effects of it. So those problems allied to vaccine hesitancy in vulnerable groups means that we could still be facing a third surge later in the year. So the government has to be careful. But what we've always argued for is a zero COVID approach. And that doesn't mean that you can eradicate this virus, but it's rather like zero measles or zero polio. You don't get rid of the virus, but it's zero tolerance of viral spread. And I think the government could be doing much more in terms of community tracking of cases, tracing contacts, and particularly ensuring that people isolate, because then you take out the key people in the population and add
it's very interesting that. Yeah, and we certainly seeing that surge testing working quite well, aren't we, with the South African variant? Given everything you've said then, what do you make of this call by a lot of Conservative backbenchers who say that we should lift all restrictions by the end of April because that's when the top 9 groups will have been vaccinated and they make up for 99% of COVID deaths? Do you think that's definitely the wrong approach?
Well, I'm not a lockdown fan. I've always felt that if we adopted a zero tolerance of COVID approach with a really good community test and trace, and the vaccination rollout has only persuaded me even more that we could have done this when we use our GP teams, our primary care networks, our local public health. They've been fantastic with the vaccines. Amazing. And we could do the same to lock down those people that are symptomatic and find their contacts and get away from this kind of call center approach, which really doesn't work. So if we did that and we would have 2 months to do it, then by the end of April, there's no reason why we shouldn't have cases down to as low a level as possible, and we would be able to escape any further lockdowns.
Yeah, very interesting. And just finally, you were a former director at the WHO. We know that there has been a team out in China, and there were reports this week that they weren't allowed data, a certain amount of data. What are your thoughts about that, and what are your thoughts about the origins of coronavirus?
Well, I'm no expert on the virology of this. It's certainly true that the reports coming out are that they wanted to get the data on 174 cases that occurred in December to look at these, and the Chinese have not released that data. Look, WHO is a set of diplomatic groups. It's a member state organization, and it's only allowed in by China because of that. They wouldn't allow an independent, say, a European or American team in. There are restrictions on the data they have. I'm sure this debate will continue about whether the virus was due to, wet markets and animal transmission, or whether due to a leak from laboratories. And I think that debate, I'm afraid, will run for several more months, despite the report of this expert group.
Always good to get your thoughts. We do appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed, Professor Anthony Costello. Good to speak to you.